For those of you who don't know me and weren't here for the ribbon cutting, my name is Dr. David Fink. I have the honor of being the CEO of Jewish Family and Career Services. As many of you know, JFCS has been in Louisville for 117 years. We are guided by our Jewish values and recognize that particularly, as I said earlier, Jews were immigrants in this country and still are immigrants in this country. We were newcomers in this country. And it is very important and very significant part of our values to give back to the community and to recognize that there, by the grace of God, go I, to steal somebody else's phrase. So it is important for us to be part of the solution and be a welcoming presence for newcomers and to follow our mission to provide hope, support, and services to individuals who need it as we build a better Louisville. The fact is that we're stronger when we recognize and celebrate the diversity that newcomers bring to our community, and that it's really critical, in our opinion, that Louisville be diligent and focused in celebrating our differences. And I know you wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't feel the same way. I want to take a moment to recognize that in our audience we have several elected officials, and thank you all for being here. If you are an elected official, please stand so that we can acknowledge you and thank you for your service. Okay. Thank you. And we appreciate the struggle you have making Louisville a better place, making Kentucky a better place. I'm also going to ask members of the JFCS board and members of our Community Advisory Council to also stand. Stand up, Michael. Thank you. So, well, wait a minute. They don't. But they're also standing because they have work to do. They don't get an applause yet. They have work to do. If you have questions about JFCS services, obviously, you can ask myself, you can ask staff who are wearing badges, you can also ask one of our board members who just stood, and thank you for your support and your help. If you have just walked in and you did not have a chance to visit any of the tables that are in the hallway, many of our partners in the nonprofit sector of Louisville have tables that have a lot of important information similar to what Congressman McGarvey's office has. That it's important that you look at that and take a look at some of the resources that are available for our community. As I was hinting about with our Friday meetings, JFCS is also proud to be part of the Louisville Coalition for Immigrant Support. This is a recently established coalition that aims to provide financial support to organizations that are serving refugees and immigrants. It's a combination of agencies, nonprofits, and very concerned and vociferous individuals that really have a tremendous amount of passion. Yes, Linda, I'm in part referring to you, yes. And this coalition is really working to establish some supports for newcomers in our community, immigrants and refugees, as well as the agencies that support them. In a moment, I'm going to talk about our panelists, which is really why you're here. You're not here to listen to me ramble. But I want to sort of set a few ground rules for you all and just sort of let you know, if this is your first community chat, let you know how this happens. So we have these community chats once every 3 to 4 months related to a topic that is near and dear to JFCS and our services. You should all know that the current program is being videotaped. I want you to know that. The videotape is in the back of the room. So really, the panelists are the only one, as I mentioned to them when we prepped, they're the only ones who had to make sure that they showered today because they're on camera. The rest of you are not on camera. Now let me introduce our panelists today. Our first panelist is Kristina Mielke. Kristina Mielke is a proud Buckeye. I didn't write that, but I'm also a proud Buckeye, who has made Kentucky her home. With over 15 years of experience serving refugees and immigrants, she has had the honor of welcoming newcomers to Louisville for 11 years at JFCS, helping them realize their vocational dreams in their new home. She obtained her master's in social work from the University of Louisville Kent School of Social Work in 2019, and in 2021 was a graduate of the Bingham Fellows, which focused on the talent pipeline in Louisville. Welcome, Kristina, and thank you for being here. Next on our panel is Karina Barillas. Karina is a proud Latina Louisvillian. For more than 20 years, she has fiercely advocated for gender equity, language access, and meaningful access to services for immigrants and refugee families who have come to the U.S. facing domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. Louisville's La Casita Center, a Latinx and feminist-led nonprofit organization, was born from Karina's vision and commitment to accompaniment. It is unique in the state of Kentucky and has been recognized locally and nationally for its impact, not just on Latinx peoples, but on our community. La Casita's approach of you name it, we do it, and its best practices have developed a meaningful hospitality and accompaniment that has made La Casita a place of safety, cultural celebration, inclusivity, and belonging for families facing extreme poverty, food insecurity, and a lack of resources. Karina is also known as an unflinching crusader, sharing the beautiful spirit of La Casita while also creating space that affirm every member of our community as a worthy opportunity, investment, and respect. Her commitment to diversity was honored in 2022 among the Muhammad Ali Center's Daughters of Greatness and with the Louisville's Keeper of the Dream Award. Thank you for being here, Karina. Our next guest is Ash McCoy. Ash McCoy earned her BA from Vassar College and her master's from the New School in International Affairs. She worked for many years as a youth case manager at Kentucky Refugee Ministries and recently joined JCPS's Office of Multilingual Learners as the District Resettlement Specialist. Ash works with the school, staff, and refugee and immigrant-facing community partners to support the 20,803 multilingual learners in JCPS. Thank you, Ash. Last but not least is Representative Nima Kulkarni. Representative Kulkarni is a member of the JFCS Board of Directors and a 2023 JFCS Mosaic honoree. In 2018, Nima Kulkarni became the first Indian immigrant to be elected in the history of Kentucky legislature. She represents the 40th district in Louisville, which includes the University of Louisville and Churchill Downs. Since 2010, she's also managed her own immigration law practice. I'm having a little trouble tonight. Immigration law practice, helping others achieve the American dream. Nima has earned a BA in English literature, a Juris Doctorate, and an MBA in entrepreneurship. She has also established the New American Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to educating, engaging, and empowering immigrants in our community. As a legislator, Nima is focused on issues of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice, and has dedicated her time as a public servant to helping those most vulnerable in Kentucky. Thank you, Nima. Okay, so those are our panelists. We're very fortunate to have them, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with our questions. As a fair warning, we did review some of these questions, but for those of you who have seen me in action before, I sometimes make up questions as we go along. So I don't know if I warned you all about that, but there you have it. Well, I usually like to start our conversations with some level setting because we always think everybody comes in with the same information, but that's not always the case. So I don't know who would like to start us off. I'll let you all decide who's going to chime in here. But we often hear people talked about as if documented or undocumented is a state of being. And I'd like to have one of you start by kind of talking a little bit about what it means to be documented versus undocumented, why it's an important designation, and where it's important and where it's not important.
And if I may, I
Please.
would like to start. Raise your hand if you think that if ICE comes through that door. Raise your hand if you're going to be asked for your immigration status. Raise your hand if you think that if ICE is at the door and enters the room, ICE is going to ask you for your immigration status. Please raise your hand. Thank you. The ones that didn't raise your hand, why didn't you? Excuse me?
Because of what?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. So how would you know how would you know that I am not undocumented? Anyone? So why would ICE ask me for my immigration status? Thank you, for racial profiling, absolutely. So that is what that's what we have at the table. That's what is at stake right now. So many people, including myself, my children, people that I love, people that I work with, my full community, our community, just by the fact of how we look like, the sound of our accents, how we are perceived, we are at risk right now. Our lives are at risk. Some of us cannot rest at home. We would love to go home and just rest and turn Netflix on and binge watch whatever it is it's going on. But some of us cannot do that anymore. Some mothers, we have to stay all night thinking, is my child going to be detained today? Even if my child is a US citizen, because he is perceived as undocumented just like I am. So that is the basic of the conversation. How are we perceiving people and how are we protecting our community? Because it doesn't have to do with being documented or undocumented. As a community, we have the responsibility to protect everybody. Because if not, we are accomplices to racial profiling. Because again, my question to you all, how do you know that this woman, this Latina woman, is not undocumented? Raise your hand if you can prove today, right now, with you that you are a US citizen. What are you carrying with you that proves you are a US citizen? The ID doesn't count. Your license doesn't count. I carry my passport all the time. My children carry their passport all the time. So again, my beloved community, I am so very happy to be with you all tonight, but my plea to all of us is that, yes, we need to talk about what the difference is, but most importantly, the conversation is how are we going to protect all of us? All of us. And do it not until something bad really happens, but doing it right now, before it all starts.
Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Can everyone hear me now? Okay. All right, how's this? Okay, all right. Thank you, Karina, for presenting that and setting that expectation, because what Karina's talking about is the heart of the problem, right? Being undocumented in the US is a civil violation. It means that you don't have a certificate of naturalization, a passport, a visa in your passport saying that you're lawfully authorized to be here. And again, being unlawfully present, I'm just coming at it from a legal perspective, is a civil violation. The fear that Karina has talked about is very real because around that civil violation, immigration law, for instance, is administrative law, like bankruptcy or tax law. And that's the way our system is structured. You have forms and you have evidence. It's very, very boring, or at least it should be, except when you start throwing in xenophobia and racism. And you start picking on and choosing to profile the most vulnerable among us, because there is no way you can look at somebody and say that they're undocumented. And even if they can't produce the documents, it does not mean that they're not lawfully present. And even if they're unlawfully present, it is not a crime in the United States. It's a civil violation, and we have built a massive multi-billion-dollar criminal infrastructure around what is essentially something in our US code punishable by a fine of $250 or a maximum of 6 months in jail. We have built a massive deportation and detention mechanism to keep these individuals detained, apprehended, and removed from the United States without any due process attaching, because it's not a criminal violation. So I want people to understand that as well, that you do not have the right to an attorney. You do not have the right to a phone call. You do not have the right to a speedy trial. So these executive orders and everything that we're hearing coming out of this administration starting day one is to sow the fear and the chaos and the confusion among individuals who don't maybe have the documents that Karina was talking about. In my practice, I tell everybody, carry your passports with you if you're a citizen. I have a copy of my certificate of naturalization that I have on hand. Carry all of your documents with you if you have them, and tell your kids to and your family members too, because at this point, we are looking at a situation where there is going to be a huge expansion of the authority of our immigration enforcement agencies to basically choose who they want to pick up, who they want to round up, based on nothing that we expect from our own Constitution and our own democratic institutions. So be mindful that there is no recourse and there is no constitutional protection for the most vulnerable among us in our community as we work towards finding ways to protect and support them.
So actually, I'm sorry, before you go forward, Kristina, Nima, you mentioned the executive orders, and I think you would have had to live in a cave to not be aware that several executive orders have been signed since inauguration. Can you, as an attorney, as an immigration law attorney, can you just sort of, again, level set for the audience what impact those, the current executive orders have on concerns about deportation and ICE raids, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had to bring a little cheat sheet because there were so many signed on day one. Obviously, we've heard about mass deportation just being a singular goal of this administration. And we can get into some of the details and the context of who we're talking about when we talk about the undocumented population in the United States. But just as a very brief summary, there has been an executive order signed, this is all as of yesterday, day one, that bars asylum. Asylum is codified in our U.S. Code at Section 1158. It basically says anybody that enters the United States as newly arrived, whether at a port of entry and regardless of their status, has the eligibility to apply for asylum within 1 year. There's various eligibility criteria. Asylum is a humanitarian status for individuals that have been victims of persecution or that fear persecution in their home country, and there's various categories to be eligible for that. But that system was essentially shut down by Trump in the prior administration, was not fully ramped back up under the Biden administration, and now we have a complete bar on new arrivals who are going to seek asylum. The impact of that is, of course, we had this sort of remain in Mexico policy where people weren't actually allowed on U.S. soil to file for asylum with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services or with our immigration courts. The CBP-1 app, which was an app that was developed by the, and I'm sorry, you can stop me from, sorry, this is a lot, I know it's a lot, which was developed to try to funnel and create some kind of order for all of the individuals that were at the border trying to get asylum. So when you hear about surges and invasions and all these people that are at the southern border, they are seeking asylum. That app was discontinued, shut down completely as of yesterday. All appointments were canceled. So these individuals that have been sitting there waiting in Mexico under fear of extortion and kidnapping and much worse, that's it. They don't get to come to the United States even though they were having an appointment scheduled, even though they may have confirmation of that appointment. If they hadn't already done it before yesterday, they don't get to do it. That's the impact of one executive order. I will move to the national emergency, so declaring national emergency at the southern border. This allows this administration, and I won't say his name, this administration to militarize, right? So if it's a national emergency, he can use the power of the military to enforce our immigration laws. Again, there are two immigration enforcement agencies, Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but this would have our entire military, all the branches of the military capably deployed to the border without any further training or understanding of who they're trying to apprehend, treating all of them like they're invading this country with the intent to harm. And the language of that, so that asylum bar I mentioned is called guaranteeing the state's protection against invasion. The language in the order declaring it a national emergency at the southern border talks about America's sovereignty under attack. It talks about foreign criminal gangs seizing control of parts of cities. Now, does that sound familiar to anybody? So think about those debunked claims from this past summer finding their way into the actual language of the executive order that was signed yesterday. This is what we're dealing with. An administration that is taking an entire, however many millions of people, trying to seek humanitarian relief, calling them invaders, and threats to our democracy. Military threats. Those are two of the biggest ones. Birthright citizenship, I'm sure you all have heard about. Now that one is a bit of a, I think Hail Mary for them. It's a constitutional, amendment. It's the 14th Amendment. He is essentially directing every agency not to issue documentation to prove citizenship. So if you're a child that's born not to citizens, even if you are born to one undocumented parent and the other one is not a citizen, so they're here on maybe a student visa or some other worker visa, but they're not green card holders and they're not citizens, you are not supposed to be issued a certificate of naturalization. You are not going to get a passport. The birth certificate question, because those are issued by the states, we don't know. That's not detailed in the executive order. It's just no agency shall issue any documentation that would prove the citizenship of a child that's born to non-citizen parents in the United States. That is contradictory to our Constitution. So we have on day one an administration that is essentially directing federal agencies to flout the Constitution of the United States and not follow its specific provisions.
So let me circle back for a minute, if I may, which is that, thinking about what Karina started off talking about and her very passionate statement and the examples that she gave. But what I'm hearing so far is that what you're describing, as you describe these executive orders, I'm not really hearing anything that is relevant to individuals being afraid of going to work or being afraid of going to church or kids being afraid of going to school here in terms of what the executive orders fit with. Is that a fair kind of summary of that piece?
Well, these are three.
Okay.
There were several signed. And there's a general expansion contained in several of these of, again, immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection to just whoever they want to round up. So one other thing that they did day one is rescind, right? The prior administration, so the Biden administration's priorities, which was targeting people with criminal records, people that were threats to national security. Now, because those are rescinded and there is a corresponding expansion of the authority of immigration enforcement agencies to basically round up whoever they want. So anybody that is undocumented, suspected of being undocumented, can be picked up and detained. And because you don't have those due process rights, once you're in that system, it is incredibly difficult for immigration attorneys to find you, for your family to find you, and that's the danger, because there is this expanded authority. And I'll just close by saying that authority is significant, because we think of Customs and Border Protection as border protectors, but they have jurisdiction 100 miles in the interior of the United States. That is the majority of the country, right? Think of the cities that we're talking about 100 miles inland. That's their jurisdiction already. So these administrative orders or executive orders essentially expand that authority even further, and they are talking about mandating cooperation with local law enforcement. Now, that's important because they can't make a local law enforcement agency cooperate with them. There are specific agreements they have to put in place and agree to and opt into, but states can do that. So Kentucky can do that, and states are already talking about immigration-related bills filed on a state level that would mandate cooperation or mandate entry into these agreements with ICE or Customs and Border Protection.
So to help me understand this, and then we'll get back into, we'll get
This is a whole
Kristina
thing.
involved. Let me try and pull that out a little bit further. So if the state, for example, issues that, does that mean that the state would mandate that Kentucky State Police cooperate, or they would be mandating that Louisville Metro Police cooperate?
So they would mandate local law enforcement, whatever that means. So it could be LMP, it would be everybody. Like it could be Kentucky State Police, it could be county by county.
Okay, and maybe everybody already knows this, but what's the current status of Metro Louisville's stance, and what Metro Council's current? There's some under my understanding is that under the Fisher administration there was right, there was a statute.
So there,
No, go ahead. Ben.
my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that we did issue an ordinance directing LMPD to not cooperate with ICE in any capacity that
Correct.
they need to, right? So
Correct.
I will just note this is one of those things where I do not think we want to be in the crosshairs. So I think the fewer times that gets mentioned for the next little bit, the better.
Agreed.
Just, that's my political advice. Let us not raise the fact that is on the books. Let's just do the work.
Okay. So the sounds like a conversation you and I may have had.
I just wanted to say, like whenever we are listening to all of this, a lot of people, the response that I usually get is like, no, that is not going to happen here. No, that is going to happen in Texas. No, that is going to happen in Chicago. That is the response. Maybe it's some denial because it's so scary to hear all those things. But let me tell you that the last time around, we did have Puerto Ricans taken to immigration jail. And I'm pretty sure you all know that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. So we did have that. I don't know if you also saw in the news that veterans with mental health issues, born and raised in the U.S., but that look like me, were deported to a country that they don't belong to. So those are realities. It is not something far away, a utopia, that maybe a dystopian story that we're talking about. That is something that happened here in our city, not in Lexington, not in Covington, in our city of Louisville. So it is very important that everything that we are hearing from Nima right now about the laws, that we take it very seriously.
Agreed.
Because it's serious and it's real.
So let me ask Ash. JCPS, is, as we mentioned, has 20,000 multilingual learners. What is JCPS's approach to documented versus undocumented youth?
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, thinking of documented and undocumented, I think we often have this sort of flat understanding of what that means, and that most people not have any documentation at all. It could be a temporary status, it could be overlapping statuses, and then also what that means for us thinking about that a little deeper, like what is the difference between immigrants and refugees? And a lot of times I feel like there's this underlying value judgment of who's deserving of protection, and where people are coming from, and most of the time it's just a matter of benefits and rights that people can access once they're here, right? People are fleeing for the same reasons. When we talk about refugees coming through the refugee resettlement program versus, like Nima was saying, people waiting with their children 7 months. We have those students in our district who are waiting 7 months at the border for their CBP-1 appointment to come in as an asylum seeker. It's the same situation. So when we're having these conversations, really unpacking, what does this language mean? Who is deserving, in these conversations? So JCPS, we have over 20,000 students, multilingual students. And I will say a lot of the policies that will protect them in these times have been on the books for years, right? So there's pretty robust federal protection that's in place that protects students' educational privacy. We have guidance on the books from our general counsel that will also protect students. So I think if we look at the law of the land currently, we can't ask for immigration status. We don't. If a federal official were to come to school and say, we demand the immigration status of the student, we don't have it. We don't want it. We will never collect it. So there's that. That's Plyler versus Doe. That's the law of the land for over 40 years and should be. There's also very clear guidance for all of our staff about FERPA, the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. We do a mandatory training at the beginning of every school year. Every single person in the district does this training to remind and refresh everyone what is information that can be released. And it's not going to be to a federal agency asking about immigration status, I'll tell you that. So that's very clear. You know, that's been on the books. That's going to remain on the books for us. And then, you know, there's a lot of training that's going on right now. There's a lot of movement in the district of training mental health practitioners, training family resource center coordinators, training school nursing staff, getting in touch with all of our role groups to say, how are you holding our students and families? How are we connecting them with our community partners, so many of you that I see here today? How are we making sure that when we make a referral that we know it's a good, warm handoff that can actually meet that student? So we're holding it. And also we have a very strong general counsel. They are staying very, very up to date day by day with changes that are happening. And I can say that they've been really responsive to understanding what is the depth of need to protect our students and families, and they'll continue to do that.
Okay, thank you. Kristina, I know you were going to speak earlier. I'm going to ask you also, though, to chime in on some questions we've had online about, and some of this, in part, Nima referred to when she mentioned, so asylum seekers will no longer be given kind of the opportunity to seek asylum within the United States. They have to stay in Mexico or presumably stay in Canada. Tell us, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about the difference between somebody referenced emergency refugee status versus humanitarian parole versus temporary protective status, and then I'm gonna circle back, Nima, and make you put on your legal hat again in a minute.
Sure. So my comment was going to be very similar to Ash's in that people's documentation status is never static. So we see a lot of individuals who come in on one status, their status changes, it sundowns, they get a new status.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. Can you explain why a status might change? I mean, my status hasn't changed.
What a level of privilege that you have, David.
I don't deny that for 1 second. Go ahead.
So status changing could mean anything from the law that so it's easier to give an example than anything else. So humanitarian parole, that was a program that was instituted in 2021, I believe, it was 2021. A lot of refugee service providers call it CHNV, which is Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelan humanitarian parole. So this was one of the ways for the Biden administration to funnel a lot of asylum seekers that they were seeing coming from 4 different countries to enter the United States under a conditional parole status. For Cubans, that they have the Cuban Adjustment Act, so after a year and a day, they can change their status to a permanent resident. But for Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, this led them to be able to apply for asylum once they got here. However, within our client base, I've seen a lot of, I don't want to say miseducation, but a lot of misconceptions about what HP means and what they need to do in order to be able to legally stay in the United States. Another example would be the Afghan parole that we saw in 2021. Sorry, Biden was in 2022. Afghans were in 21. The Afghan parole, that parole expired. So every Afghan parolee who entered, if they hadn't received their asylum, if their asylum hadn't been granted, they had to reapply for parole in order to legally maintain their residence in the United States. We did a big outreach within the Afghan community to try to make sure that educate people that you you have to apply for renewal for your parole. It's not automatic. You don't just automatically have residency. So that's what it means by like the different statuses. They can change at any point in time.
And now I know I'm getting caught on a detail, but I assume that's also happened with some Ukrainian?
Yes.
Okay.
So all of the humanitarian paroles initially were 2-year paroles.
Okay, thank you.
So in the hopes that Congress would pass some kind of permanent act like they did with Amerasians or like they did with a lot of the Cuban refugees who came in previous decades. That never happened. And so a lot of these populations are now here, but with some very precarious documentation. And if you don't know how to take care of it or how to make sure to get your permanent residency, that your status can change from one day to another. DACA is another one. So if people aren't, for a while, the DACA renewal was down because it was a court case, and then it opened up again. So if your DACA expired during this time, like it's just all kinds of different things can change that.
And if I may add a little bit about the statuses, how they change. If you are applying for your U visa, that is a visa that protects victims of crime. Maybe I arrive, to the country, fleeing from domestic violence. I come here, alleged perpetrator finds me, and there is a situation. Then I am waiting for my U visa that will protect me and my children, to be safe in this country. We don't know how that status gonna look like. We don't know if because there's a long wait for U visa holders to become green card holders. So it is not only parolees, it is not people that are coming with other kind of entries to the country. It's the ones that are already inside, victims of crime, victims of domestic violence, victims of human trafficking that are at risk of losing their statuses.
Okay, thank you.
You also asked about TPS.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
I was
left
gonna
that off.
mention that, yes.
So TPS is for individuals. They can apply after they are already in the United States, and it gives them a temporary protected status. So usually, I looked it up because a whole bunch of them just got renewed. But there are, I think they're up to they're 17? Thank you. 17 different countries right now that have TPS status. So some of those statuses are as recent as this past year being 2024, and others are as old as 1992, I believe was the oldest, that have been continuously reapproved year after year. And so that temporary protected status, you are allowed to temporarily be in the United States legally with a work permit with no eligibility to get a green card for a certain amount of time. Usually the approval is around 18 months. So every 18 months to 2 to 3 years. And then they come out with new regulations. So every 18 months, okay, now we're reauthorizing El Salvador. I'm just saying that one because that's one of the longer ones. We're reauthorizing them. We've reauthorized them since 98, 99. I can't remember what year they got authorization. But it's every 18 months then that you're looking at, okay, do I need to reauthorize now? There's always a chance that they could not reauthorize it, and that does happen. Countries fall on and off of TPS, and then people's statuses sundown.
So, and I assume, Nima, based on what you were saying, is that we would presume that there will not be renewals of TPSs.
Yeah, and just to provide a little bit of context, these executive orders are one thing. During the last administration, most changes to immigration policy happened all the time with things like reducing the refugee cap, things like suspending TPS. So these are, I want to also reiterate, some of the most vulnerable people. This is humanitarian immigration, asylum, refugee, TPS, even U and T visas, which is, as Karina mentioned, U visas for victims of crime, and then T visas are for victims of trafficking. These are easily changed, right? And I want to just briefly kind of again, level set a little bit about our system itself. It makes no sense. Our system is not like orderly and rational and, kind of tied to our economic needs or, our desire to help people. It's not tied to anything. It was designed from day one when people actually started to want to come here to keep certain people out. We did not want, for instance, anybody who was outside of Northern Europe or Western Europe. We didn't want Eastern Europeans. We certainly didn't want anybody who was Italian. We didn't want Polish people. We didn't want Irish people. We didn't want anybody from Asia. We didn't want anybody, certainly, from the Southern Hemisphere. So our immigration laws have evolved to just keep more and more people out. Until 1965, we had per country limits. So if you're from certain countries, you just couldn't come here at all. The Civil Rights Act of 1965, and then, of course, the Immigration and the INA, Immigration Naturalization Act, essentially opened up immigration to every country in the world. That's 1965. That's not a really long time ago. And that's why you have individuals now who are able to come here from South America, from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia. And those people have, of course, enriched this country in the decades since they've been here, but it's been recent because we have historically just tried to keep people out. What is happening now is essentially the same thing. The people that can be kept out in the easiest sense for this administration are, for instance, TPS, which is designated by the Secretary of Homeland Security. They designate those countries. They can just take them off the list and say there's no more TPS. TPS, temporary protected status, is given to individuals from countries to which they cannot return. They cannot return because there is no country, either because of disaster, because of war, because of there's no government for them to go back to. And there's a reason that they've been put on this list by the Secretary of Homeland Security. This administration will end that. They have cut already the refugee program. They've just suspended the entire program. There is, of course, the Immigration Act of 1980, which is then completely being ignored. I mentioned that they've already barred asylum. It's just important for us to understand that all of these statuses that we're talking about are humanitarian in nature, and they are the easiest to switch on and off with just an executive order or with a policy memo. So the law itself, our immigration laws haven't changed for over, 40 years? I think since 1990 was the last change that we had to our employment-based system, and the family-based, all of that's even older. So it is not a system that has kept pace with any of the needs. And for context, that was before Google existed. So we have laws, employment-based immigration laws on the books from before Google existing, if that gives us any sense of what we're working with here. Which is why, because those laws are kind of calcified and not moving, and because Congress hasn't done anything. The reason we're all here, the reason all of this is possible is because Congress, under Democratic and Republican administrations, has done nothing to modernize our immigration system, simply to keep pace with who we want here to reunite with their families or who we want here because of what employers need. We have done nothing. Congress has done nothing. They're the only body that can do anything about this. You cannot make comprehensive immigration reform happen with an executive order or a policy memo. And it's that failure that has led us to everything that we're talking about here today. That failure to change our system has allowed this kind of action to take place and this kind of victimizing of some of our most vulnerable foreign-born populations in the U.S.
So that's a great transition point for me, and thank you for that, which is that, we've had a failure to act, a failure to change the laws, which has, over the 40 years or so, has led us to what is becoming clearly a culture of fear. So my question to you as panelists is, what do we do for our friends, our clients, our colleagues? How do we help them with the fear? And what recommendations do you have? What do you say to your clients? What do you say to the people you're doing educational counseling with, the folks that La Casita serves, people in JCPS that are either, for that matter, they may be staff, but also families who all of a sudden are afraid to send their kids to school. What do we say to them? to help with this?
We can
That's-
start and just go down.
Whoever wants to go. It hits all four of you, so whoever wants to go first.
Why don't you start? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
So it's really important for all families in our community to understand their rights, not just with ICE, but with police in general, with law enforcement in general. But if we are protecting our immigrant and refugee neighbors and community members, inform them about their rights, trying not to scare them, but make sure that they know what they should be doing. So things like making what is it called? Not advance directive, a safety plan, thank you. A safety plan, a power of attorney, having somebody preferably with a permanent legal status who is available to take over custody of their children, making sure that daycares and schools have a second or third contact in order, just in case something should happen. Educating people about what should you do if ICE stops you. Don't run, don't resist. But then what do you do if you are a person who has that privilege of, okay, I know ICE is they're never gonna stop me, this is not a problem. But what if you see someone that's currently in that situation? So first, private businesses, nonprofits, organizations, unless there's a new law that gets enacted, do not have to give entrance to ICE you have to give them permission to enter. You do not have to allow them to enter unless they have a warrant signed with a specific person's name on it, and the name has to be spelled correctly, and the address has to be exact, signed by a immigration authority. Signed by a judge. Must be signed by a judge. Not sometimes they will bring, ICE can bring warrants, but it's signed by an immigration authority, not a judge. It has to be signed by a judge. So instruct people, you don't have to let them in. Also, if you see something and it is safe for you to do so, film, report. Because the more reports that we have, the more proactive we can be within the community in informing our neighbors, our community members. This is where they've been targeting traditionally. We do have new laws coming out in different states about rescinding what we call safe spaces, which have traditionally been houses of worship, schools, hospitals, and so making sure that individuals understand what their rights are and that we understand what rights every person, every human being has, regardless of documentation status, by being here in the United States.
Who else wants to? Anybody want to add to that or touch on it?
If I may, silence is compliance. And let me say that again. Silence is compliance. If somebody is facing injustice, discrimination, racial profiling, and I am silent, I am in compliance with that person that is doing a horrible crime. And I call it a crime because I remember the faces of kids talking to me in the previous round, saying, "Karina, can you talk to the president so they don't take my mommy and my daddy away?" It's reality. Seeing moms calling us at La Casita and saying, "I was just dropped off from immigration jail with my baby. I was picked up while I was dropping my other child at the school bus." Stop. So let me say that again. Silence is compliance. As a community, we have a responsibility to protect all of us. That is our responsibility. Ask us what we need. Don't impose on us what you think we should do. Ask us what we need, how we need you to accompany us. Especially if you don't understand really how in the world something so evil can happen. It has happened through history. And talking about history, learn the history. Not only the history of the world, something that happened in Europe, something that happened, in colonization. Learn the history of Louisville. If you are from German and Irish ancestors, you have a responsibility to be in solidarity with the new immigrants. Your ancestors were murdered because of being immigrants. Silence is complicity. So call your senator, your state representative, your council member. Pay attention. Pay attention. Because the fear is real. What is about to happen is real. Volunteer, donate, talk to others about this. Bring it even to spaces where you think that maybe they don't care. My neighbor next door, she goes to this church that has a bilingual service, and I told her, do you think that I can go and talk to your pastor? And she said, no, most likely everybody has documents. I have passed by her church, and believe me, that is not the case, right? So pay attention, open your eyes. Don't think that everything that you hear in the news is only a story that is not going to happen to us. You didn't hear about the stories that I'm telling you right now. I didn't make them up. They happen here in this community, 15 minutes away from here, 35 minutes away from here. It happened here. That you didn't hear about it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means the families were so scared to come forward and telling the whole community and the news, look what happened to me. Silence is complicity, beloved community.
Ash, before you go, and I know I want to pile on you for a minute, which is that prior, we at registration for the event, we asked people if they have any questions online. And there were several questions regarding JCPS, including JCPS staff wanting to know, again, specifically, what they can do to make their children in their classrooms feel more comfortable, what happens to children, and some of this is from JCPS staff and some not, but what happens to those children if the children are in school and their parent is taken while the kids are in school. So as you think about kind of what you say at JCPS to the kids, will you, if you don't mind incorporating some of those questions into your response as well?
Yeah, and I'll say, building on what Karina said, these things didn't start today, right? There were so many people who were separated from their families and deported this last year and in previous administrations, and that awareness that we all must have, let this kick us all into gear, that we need to study up on what is our role to protect our community members, and make sure that our information is good. We're talking about know your rights trainings. Make sure that that is good information. There's so many wonderful resources, even in this room, who can provide trainings, who can give us that guidance so that we're not telling our most vulnerable community members something that can put them in danger. And I think for JCPS, that's part of what we're working on as well, is making sure when we're working with our general counsel that we're getting the right information and that we're sharing that with our community members. So my office, the Office of Multilingual Learners, we do a community partner meeting once a month. Many of our friends here in this room come to that meeting. And at the meeting last Friday, we brought a member of our general counsel to explain these rules so that when you're out in the community and one of your friends or family says, I'm scared to send my kid to school, you have that good information straight from the top of our district that no, you absolutely can send your child to school. And if someone comes with an immigration warrant that is not signed by a judge, that doesn't have the right date, that doesn't have the right name, that is not a very particular document, which I'm sure Nima can speak more to than I can, they're not coming in this school. That's going to go to our general counsel, right? So making sure that we all have this good information and that we can share it. And that's not just for the school system, that's for all of us, right? I think about, in the first administration about things like public charge, which you can also speak about, Nima, better than I can, please. But also affirming what our community members can access, because we saw it before, right? When there's danger of accepting some sort of public benefit, that it's going to derail your process to adjust your status. So kids stop going to the doctor, people stop accepting Head Start, things like that. We all need that good information to say, oh no, your baby can eat free lunch at school. Please do. That is their right. So making sure that not only tonight, when we go home, tomorrow, that we're getting that good information from our trusted partners. Sorry, I could talk all day too about this.
No, that's okay.
And also just, for our staff, like there are so many people in JCPS who are thinking about this 24/7, and it didn't start today, who are developing those trainings. How do we hold our families? How do we hold our students who come in and say, I'm having a panic attack because I'm worried about my parents? There are so many experts, mental health experts, family resource experts who are doing this work, who are making sure that they have an answer to hold that student. Not that we can control federal immigration policy, but we can control how we show up in our district, right? And those trainings are happening for staff all the time. School teachers can reach out anytime, and they do, to make sure that all of our students feel held. I'll say we do well as a district to do that.
And maybe Nima's going to cover this with the charge, but one is that I have a question that was just submitted online, which is that when you talk about the school being a safe place, is the bus a safe spot as well? Is the school bus considered?
Well, that's trainings that we're already planning already with bus drivers. And also, I meant to say this as well, forgive me, not enough coffee, but there's a tip line on the JCPS website. If you see any of this harassment, if you see things such as, immigration or any sort of agency lingering at a bus stop or harassing families, we'd like to know. And my card's outside, I can share my email information. If that's something that's coming up in the community, we would like to know. As far as I know, any attempts, this was our guidance from the Department of Justice and the Department of Education on January the 1st, that attempts to chill the environment for any student to enroll based on lack of immigration status is not something that we're doing. That is against federal guidance, right? So I would imagine that would, right, back me up, Nima, that would not be in compliance with federal law. So that's our guidance as a school district. Any attempts to chill enrollment based on immigration status or perception of immigration status is not something that we're doing, right? So we would definitely pass that up to our general counsel.
Okay. Thank you. Did you?
I'll try to be brief. Got all these notes. No, very quickly. I just want to summarize essentially what all of my colleagues on this panel said, and that is that information, accurate, timely information is critical. It's critical for people and allies to have the right information about what is happening in their neighborhoods, what is happening in the city, what is happening in the state, so that they can choose to help where they can. Right? The last time around, we talked about safe places. This is not any kind of an official thing, right? They're designated safe places. We're just calling them that because it's not good optics for ICE to run into a church and grab people while they're in service. It's not good optics for ICE to run into a school and grab kids or try to grab people on school grounds. They could do it. They could do it. But it's not a good look. So that's why it's called a safe space. That doesn't mean that anyone is actually safe. And again, last time around, JCPS did a great job because there were ICE vans sort of just driving around churches, parking lots, school parking lots, at bus stops, just to scare people. This is the kind of fear-mongering that's taking place, just to scare people, just to make you stay home, or ideally, the hope is you just leave the country because you're so afraid. You're so afraid of being taken away from your kids. And I mean, the percentage of mixed status families in Louisville, I don't exactly know, but it's high. Because if you've got, for a little bit of context, the number of undocumented individuals has remained between 11 and 12 million for over 2 decades, right? A third of those have been in this country for over 20 years. Two-thirds have been in the country for at least 10 years. So think about that. These are people that have kids, they might have grandkids, they're maybe undocumented, but they've got entire families that are citizens and that are here lawfully. And so this emergency plan is critical, but that emergency plan is predicated on timely and accurate information. At New Americans Initiative and a lot of these organizations, we're not a direct services organization, but we are a convener and a disseminator of information. And I think that is the role that we need to play for organizations like La Casita, for people like Ash. We need to let them know this is what's happening so that they can then take it to their own organizations and say, okay, here's the plan. You need documents, so we do not have enough immigration attorneys in Kentucky to do anything. There's just not enough at all. What we need to do is mobilize attorneys. That's something else we're working on. That's family law attorneys, that's criminal attorneys, to get the kind of resources in the network so that if you find your neighbor being harassed by ICE and they don't know what to do and they get picked up, you know exactly who to call. You know who to call, whether it's an immigration attorney or a family law attorney, or if you have the documents already prepared by a family law attorney, which is providing decision-making power to a family member or a school staff member to make decisions for your children. You need somebody to make medical decisions. You need to let schools know. You need to let your community know what is happening.
So Nima, I'm sorry. I need you to back up a minute because I think you went through that fast. Can you talk again about the details in an emergency plan and what you mean when you say decision-making power about your children? And what are you talking about? Let's go into that.
It's just it's a set of documents, right? So what would you do if you were in fear? Like tomorrow someone could just pick you up and you don't know where you're going to end up. Then you won't be able to contact your family. What kind of documents, what kind of information do you need to have in place? We talk about, right, we have wills. We want to have medical powers of attorney for our own families if that time comes when we're not able to make those decisions. But in an emergency situation, who's going to take care of your family? Who's going to take care of your kid? Who has access to your accounts, right? Who has access to your home? Who has access to your car? Like these basic things, you need to have a circle of either family, friends, community members. Churches were huge in stepping up in this last time around, who are able to take over that role for the rest of your family if you've been picked up. So just bear in mind what kinds of documents. You don't need necessarily a full power of attorney, but you do need something designating, for instance, guardianship, temporary guardianship, temporary decision-making power, temporary custodial power of your children and any ancillary, any institutions that they need access to. You need to have phone numbers, addresses, contact information for people to call for help. That includes resources like whoever in school, teachers, staff, whoever you need to contact, if it's a direct services organization, attorneys, anybody that you can think of. So you need to have all of that in place, and think about how comprehensive that is, that you need to think through step by step what exactly you need and who needs to know what if you just disappear tomorrow. So there's not necessarily like a set, but those are some general kind of documents that you want to have in place, but the plan itself is making sure that you have people and contacts that can be called upon.
I assume that includes, for example, Cameron's form, right? That is, if we can disseminate that form a little bit more widely, that's something that would be useful to have out, right? So going back, thank you.
And if I may, David,
Please.
just really quick. In our community, it's very important that teenagers, especially kids 10 and up, that they know about this plan. Mm-hmm. In families where children are the ones that speak English, they are the ones that carry the knowledge. So what does that mean? It means that it will be the child, the one that will know what steps will happen. We have a lot of families that don't read and write in any language or that speak Spanish as their second language. I know that happens in a lot of the other communities. So it is very important that these children are also trained on what to do, because they are already the ones that are carrying back and forth the information from the schools, as well as this kind of information, and they will know who will be the safe place to go to, who is the person that they can talk to. Also, it's very important to consider families that have children and youth and adults with special care needs. In the past, something that really worries us, we work with these families, is that some of our kiddos, if mom is not the one that gives them the food or the medicine, they won't accept it. That would put immediately the child in danger of their life. So it's very important that all these plans and that families know about this. If somebody is going through domestic violence or sexual assault, or somebody is in a human trafficking situation, they also need to know that the safety plan could help them escape, but that we don't know what is going to happen with their legal status. Or we don't know if they're going to be at more risk and they won't be able to leave their relationship even if they have the safety plan. So all of these points are very important for us to have the conversations with the community and that clarify all this information.
I wanted to add just from the school district, the importance of communicating with school, making sure that we use an online platform called Infinite Campus, making sure that you have every single one of your emergency contacts, whoever you want to step in and pick your kids up from school, if it's a day that you can't make it in the afternoon, or if you want them to take care of your children if something happens and you're detained. Make sure that those contacts are updated, make sure the phone numbers are updated, and add as many people as you need to. We always want that good information. We have a community translation library with forms that are update your contact information, update your emergency contact. You can email me. I'll send you the link to that community partner translation library. All of those documents are already prepared. Same for power of attorney. That's something that we've had in the district forever. I think we have it translated in probably 20 languages. If you need it, let us know. It exists. And just making sure that all of our friends, all of our community members know, you know, there's actionable steps that we can take. There's some things we can't control, but these things we can make a good plan. And I know those conversations with kids are really hard. I can't imagine. My heart absolutely aches to imagine having that conversation with your child, but we know we have to have this conversation, right? So just making sure all the information we can have on file, the better.
Schools don't require notarizations of those forms, do they?
The power of attorney form does require notarization. We have free notaries at every single school. You can fill it out. We'll notarize it for free. You can hold on to it, you and the person that you designate as the power of attorney. And then when you need to use it, you can bring it to school. And you can just have that, just hold on to it. Hopefully you never have to
So,
use
well,
it.
hold on. Excuse me. Wait, hold a second. In about 5 minutes, I'm sorry, Francis. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to turn over to the audience for some questions. So let's do this in a little bit more orderly way. So I
lively
appreciate that.
chat.
So we'll follow up on that.
I just want to
go
just
ahead.
very quickly add a couple of before, let's just say before, if ICE is knocking on your door. And I want to include workplaces as well, because workplace raids are going to be ramped up just like they were the last time, and they're going to target certain facilities, right? Certain employers aren't going to feel the brunt of it. Other ones are, again, just in terms of where people are. This is a problem for workplaces where refugees have been resettled because they know there's a lot of people that look that they might be undocumented, they don't know the status, they may not have their green card on them, they may not have this documentation because they're working in a factory. And so these are, again, some of the most vulnerable people who may not, speak enough English to understand what exactly is going on. I have, and I'll share this with Courtney, but I want to sort of underscore the importance of knowing what the difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant is. Judicial warrants are signed by a judge. They pass constitutional muster, right? There's due process that's followed. They have to list specific names, dates, places, the reason, so probable cause is attached to these warrants. You don't get one unless you can show there's a reason to enter someone's home. So if there's a judicial warrant, there's a reason. It's been signed by a judge. Local law enforcement has a reason that they've shown the judge that it's necessary. Those you have to comply with. Administrative warrants for a long time from ICE, they're just signed by an officer. Sometimes they're not signed at all. They have no dates, they have no places, they may not have any names at all, they might have the wrong names. There is zero oversight and accountability. You do not have to comply with an administrative warrant. You do not have to let ICE into your home. You do not have to let ICE into your workplace, because there is no due process and no probable cause that they have shown anybody. Probably the suspicion of having somebody that might possibly be undocumented is not enough to pass constitutional muster. So it's really important that people, whoever we are, the individuals that are impacted, families, individuals in schools, direct services organizations, just neighbors and friends, understand what they're dealing with. When someone's just sort of waving a paper in your face, that doesn't mean it's the right paper. To Karina's point and Ash's point of people that are not speaking English in the home, for instance, or who are not able to communicate, cards. Just cards that are sort of made out saying, I, want to speak to an attorney, I don't want to speak, you can't come in here. Just something that you can present to an officer saying we're not complying with this warrant. At a, kind of worst case scenario, if there's not an adult present, or if there's not an adult who's able to communicate in English to the officer that no, we are not complying with this administrative warrant. I think that is really critical. So this information sharing to employers, to schools, to individuals, and to neighbors and friends and community, I think is really critical, and that's what I know we're all going to be working with. The coalition is made up of organizations who are, wanting all of this timely information and are able to disseminate it to all of the communities and networks that they serve. And that is going to be the most critical part of these first early days of this administration, because there's, I think, another 75 executive orders being signed today or have already been signed. Just expect, shock and awe, chaos and confusion for at least the next few weeks, next several weeks. They will likely shut down the consulates. That's our legal immigration system. So they're going to try to shut all of that down as well, just like they did last time. So just expect a lot of confusion, a lot of people not knowing what's going on. The best thing that we can do to arm ourselves and defend ourselves against that is truth, it's fact, it's reality, and it's accurate information. And so I encourage all of you to get in touch with one of us or some organization that you trust that has access to this information, that has access to these materials that you can study, you can keep, or you can provide to your own neighbors and community members as well.
So let me pause for a second. I know you're about to say something, Kristina. I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, write it if you need to. I have a series of questions for you, Nima, to follow up. Oh. Before I do that, Nima mentioned Courtney. Courtney is here. If you RSVP'd to today's event, we're going to be sending out some information in the next 24 to 48 hours relevant to tonight, including some of the resources, things like the court order, what a court order actually looks like, some other information, and we will try to work on translation services as well. So that's one piece. So if you did not RSVP for tonight's event, we don't have your email. But if you RSVP now, the link is still up, you can still RSVP. I'm glad you're here if you didn't RSVP, but you can still RSVP now, and that way we have your email address, and we can send you the information that we're going to be sending out to everybody. So that's a quick housekeeping piece. And the RSVP link is on our website.
I just wanted to say really quick, some of these resources are outside in the hallway right now.
Yes.
So make sure before you leave, you check out those tables, the red cards, the Know Your Rights cards. I know at least we have them in Haitian Creole and Spanish. I'm sure there's tons of things from NAI, from ACLU as well. So make sure you take a look and familiarize yourself with those resources so that we can give them to our community members and actually know what they are. Because it is stressful, right? If you're coming into conflict with someone and they're waving a paper or whatever, like, being able to take a beat and know, I know this information, right? I can respond, be in my body, be clear. Like, let's familiarize ourselves with that good information as much as possible.
Thank you. So, Nima, I have a question for you. You mentioned just now, and I want to make, because it sounded to my amateur ear that there was a contradiction, because early tonight you talked about you don't have the right to an attorney, and just now you said that people should even have a card that says, I want to speak to an attorney. So can you clarify that for us a little bit?
You can have an attorney if you can afford one and find one that's willing to serve you. In our judicial system, we have a right to like a court-appointed lawyer, right, to defend us. But because this isn't criminal law, we don't get that right. So if you have an attorney, right, on your own that you're paying, that's
So
what I meant.
you are allowed access to an attorney if you have one, but you will not be given one as if, like a public defender, for example.
Correct.
Okay.
There's no right to an attorney.
Didn't say that on their video.
So, okay, Francis, hold on.
So what I'll say is that's why these sort of networks. So like we don't have enough immigration attorneys, but we
Right.
have to train other attorneys, like train criminal defense attorneys, train family law attorneys, any attorney, anybody. You would do bankruptcy. We can train you on how to help somebody who's been detained or apprehended by ICE, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take everybody willing to show up and represent these people, because they're not going to just have that readily available.
So, and then there was a question online, and I think I know the answer, so I'll just put it this way. My understanding of the way our state government is set up is that the governor does not have the right to order the attorney general to do anything. The attorney general decides what to pursue and what not to pursue. There was a question online that asked if Kentucky was going to join the lawsuit regarding birthright status, right? That 14 attorneys general, I think ACLU is on that lawsuit as well, right? Is that one of the ones you're on? Separate lawsuit. But so, you know, Governor Beshear doesn't get to tell Russell Coleman to do that, as, you know, in the federal government, the attorney has, the president now has more power over the attorney general, but that does not happen in the state of Kentucky. So it is safe to assume that it is unlikely that the Attorney General of Kentucky will be joining in that lawsuit.
Very, very unlikely. Absolutely not going to happen.
Okay. I was being nice. We don't have to be nice. Thank you.
But I will say something that they're also looking at doing is expanding the powers of attorneys general to prosecute and enforce these immigration laws. What that looks like in detail, we don't know. None of these are not strong on details. It's just sort of this is what we're going to do. So just bear that in mind. Also, just take a breath, that there's going to be this huge push of, you know, stuff that sounds terrible, that is terrible, but the implementation of it, the actual tangible concrete steps, are sort of unknown to us right now.
And this isn't necessarily just for you. So if you want to take this, Kristina, and then you can have whatever you're holding on to, you can, or anybody can answer this. There were a lot of comments tonight about immigration custom enforcement agents, and where, you know, that we don't have to let them in, that they're driving in vans around neighborhoods, that we need to be conscious of that and we need to report that. Anybody know what they look like? I mean, how do we identify them? What are they? Do they have to have ID? Does it say ICE on the side of their van? Like, what's, you know? This is in, you know, I'm being a little humorous, but it's actually a very serious question, right?
Yeah.
So
one, that was the point that I was going to
look
talk
at that.
about earlier.
You and I in sync for once.
Serendipitous when that comes up. So ICE is notorious for saying that they are police, just police. So if a police officer comes to your door and they are not dressed out like LMPD or any police jurisdiction that you know, you are fully within your rights to ask for their identification. And they do have a badge which they must present to you if you ask to see it. You do not have to let them in unless you verified, again, all of the things that we've talked about. So yeah, it is something that they will frequently do, because they know that police are trusted more or less within the local community. They will try to trick you.
And I'm going to do a brief Karina, I'm going to do a brief public service announcement, which is that as an agency, for example, you know, we have a locked front door that you have to buzz to get in. I don't know how many of you have that type of security. People let people in our front door all the time. JFCS is going to have a training for our staff, reminding them of the importance of why we have a locked front door. And we have a locked front door so that it's our clients who are coming in. Or, you know, so I just kind of would recommend agencies think about that as well. I'm sorry, Karina.
JCPS does as well. Every single school. Locked door will buzz you in with ID.
Yeah, but your staff are better trained, or
they
or
are.
better behaved than our staff are. So.
We'll come train you. It's okay.
You know, going back to how ICE looks like, they are very creative. So we've had reports. I was just speaking to someone this afternoon, actually saying that some of the new ways is dressing as Jehovah's Witnesses. So that is one. The other one, for you to know, sometimes they even speak Spanish or whatever language, depending on the area. So they are getting very, very creative on how to go and knock on people's homes. So.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is, I promise that you all who have questions can ask questions, particularly you two who I've talked to. So if you have questions, now is your chance. Don't forget Lauren in the back.
David, just to follow up on your question, you guys, what does an ICE vehicle look like? What does a person in uniform look like? Are they, in fact, in vehicles? Are they identified? What would we see?
So they're not required to identify themselves, right? This again is going back to like due process and what we expect when police are around or trying to apprehend us. I think they can go around in unmarked vans. They can have police on there. They can be dressed however they want. They have these warrants that might be blank except for the officer's signature with no information. So there's not any oversight. One of the things that I think it's really important for local law enforcement agencies who are, whether it's mandated or whether they choose to opt into these 287G, it's 287G, just want to making sure, there's a lot of sections. These agreements saying that we will help you execute and implement these warrants is the liability. So when ICE detains somebody, picks them up and detains somebody that is a citizen and they just didn't have their papers on them and they get sued, because of course, why wouldn't you get sued? ICE and Customs and Border Protection don't get sued. LMPD would get sued. KSP would get sued. And that's a whole other sort of question. Like, who's going to pay for all of that? Who's paying anyway for the training for these officers? Who's paying for their overtime? All of that, again, details. Not great on details, just sort of the broad strokes here, just to scare people. We do not have any jurisdictions in Kentucky that are currently under any of these contracts with ICE. So that does not exist right now. It will probably take a federal mandate or a state law, and even to implement it, who's going to do it, who's being trained, where's the money coming from. But this liability piece, because they're casting such a wide net based on what people look like or where people congregate or the accents that they think they're hearing, that people will get caught up, that are not undocumented, that are absolutely lawfully present here or are just waiting because USCIS backlogs are 2 years for some of these, years and years, and you're just got a receipt notice. Do they know that that's enough to keep you in the United States? Probably not. But it is. It is enough to keep you in the United States because you're waiting for your asylum hearing 5 years down the road. So these are all very real logistical factors that are just not contemplated. So it's just critical for us to know what is going on, where and when, and what is being presented. Is it true? Is it not true? What are the facts?
Thank you. Other questions?
So basic answer, Lauren, they can look like anybody, and they can drive around in whatever they want.
Oh. Our church was recently told about a hotline that people who might be picked up by ICE should use, but we're feeling a little not sure about that, and I wanted to know if you all know about this hotline and its purpose and whether it is a good idea, because we have I'd say at least 150 Latinos who come to our Spanish Mass every Sunday, and we're wanting to help, but we're not sure we should give out this hotline or not.
Well, who is it going to? Who is it going to, who is conducting the hotline?
It was from El Surge.
Okay. Yeah. That's okay.
That's okay.
Oh, sorry. It's Louisville standing up for racial justice, showing up.
Sure.
Showing up for racial justice.
And Rosemary, if I may, please talk to El Search directly so you all can understand what the process is or whatever it is. I don't know who got it directly,
We can-
but that person needs to talk to L-Search. And that is a great question because there is going to be so much out there that we have to be very careful because, again, just like wearing a police uniform, not wearing anything, there are going to be so many creative ways to get into families' homes. So always please verify the sources. Always please talk and make sure that you understand what is going on. I think that if a very trusted and reputable organization like L-Search, most likely they're going to give you the process. That's what I will talk.
And I can give you an email. I can give you an email for somebody to contact at L-Search to tell you what.
I was going to say, they said that the person being served or whatever would have that number to call, and then they had teams of people who were going to go where that person
yes.
was just to witness it.
Yeah. And I think I would suggest reaching out directly to L-Search and making sure that that's accurate information. I know that they've done that in the past, so it's possible. But I'll give you a contact information for that.
With any form, like form from Congressman McGarvey's office that I see that refers to a release form, and it talks about waiving rights and things like that. How would somebody know it's legit?
So are you talking specifically about the privacy release?
Yes.
So all that does is allow Congressman McGarvey's office to contact these agencies and institutions on the behalf of the person who is. It just allows it. So you're waiving, essentially, not your rights, but you're saying that they're allowed to talk to people on your behalf about your case. That's all that means.
So who needs to get the form?
I mean, anybody that wants to enlist Congressman McGarvey's office to help them, if they're in the system or before they get in the system, just what I think Cameron was saying is go ahead and get it to their office so that when the time comes, they're able to contact Department of Homeland Security or any individual agency to try to find out.
So the form has to come back to you at the office? No?
Yeah, so the idea is just to get the form from any individual who's at risk of being detained and probably leave it with, like Nima was saying, leave it with someone who has like a lawful permanent status that probably isn't going to be detained by ICE. Another really important thing about that form I forgot to mention is it's only valid for 90 days after it's dated. So we're asking folks not to put a date on there, to just preemptively sign it and get it dated before turning it into our office. So that's another important thing I forgot to mention about it.
Other questions from you all? Charlene?
Thank you so much for being up there, because we don't want to, what I'm hearing is we don't want misinformation out there. We don't want fear mongering. And, there's some instances where people are on social media saying, we saw ICE, we know where they are, and all these things. And what I feel like what happens that, one, we don't know if that for sure. Two, it really puts a message for our immigrant and foreign-born neighbors to to be scared. And I don't want that. And so do you all have recommendations of which organizations or who should we call, who are the trusted folks that we should tell, there's ICE here, can someone fact check this, or can we do, can someone check this out, instead of posting on social media and having it go viral and it's actually misinformation?
That's a great question. I think anybody in the coalition, any organization in the coalition is a trusted source, so ACLU, L-Surge, New Americans, JCPS. I think that's a very important question because we don't want to alert ICE to, if people are showing up to help and, kind of gather around, we don't want that to become like a hot spot for them to then just sort of show up and round up people. I think I would just start with the coalition partners, because I think those are all trusted organizations who will be able to, if they can't help, they'll know who to call to help.
And we can when we send out the information, we can send out a list of who's in the Louisville Coalition for Immigrant Support. Any other questions?
This is a very specific question. I am aware of a family, can you hear me? Who, at their asylum hearing, at the time of their asylum hearing, they were granted discretion. Okay, the lawyer's nodding. so that's-
Prosecutorial discretion.
Pardon me?
Prosecutorial discretion.
So they are allowed to stay in the country, but they have virtually no rights, as I understand it. They're not supposed to work, they're not supposed to drive. Where do you think they stand now with this administration?
So they can rescind that, right? So that's not a status of any kind. It's a kind of deferred action. So they're basically saying we are ICE attorneys are saying we're exercising our prosecutorial discretion to say you don't have to be removed right now. You have an order of removal, but we're letting you stay in the country to, pursue what options you may have. So if you have an asylum claim, you can try to apply for asylum either through the immigration court or if you're able to apply with USCIS directly. But prosecutorial discretion doesn't mean anything because it can always be rescinded by ICE, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. So unfortunately, unless they have some other underlying basis to be in the United States, it doesn't give them any protection at all.
So,
Unless it stays, unless the ICE office or the attorney is continuing to choose to exercise that
right,
discretion.
and I don't see that happening. So what would their best option be? I'm going to talk to their lawyer about it, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I would talk to the lawyer.
I'll talk to the lawyer.
You don't hear about this. I was talking to this lady here about the offer discretion to stay in the country, and they don't have any legal status at all. And apparently it's a fairly common thing.
It is, yeah, it is because we can't, again, when we talk about mass deportation, it's impossible. It's just not possible to just round up and deport 11, 12 million people. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but to 88 billion to 1 million individuals is an estimate. It'll probably be higher. The cost of detention is astronomical. So we do not have the apparatus to just round up and keep these people for years and years if they have a claim. So the prosecutorial discretion was granted for a reason. They said you do not have to be removed because they either think they have some eligibility for some other claim that they can be here to pursue, or they're not, a danger, so they're allowed to just sort of do check-ins with ICE and just, make sure they're not violating any other laws. But it is a very tenuous thing, and it's, again, just a discretionary matter.
So I think we have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask Amos to join me up front.
So I have a question about two different types of people.
You're looking at me, so
Huh?
I'm assuming.
Yeah. So one,
Free legal
people
advice.
who have a pending asylum claim, but who are here, they have a social, they have work permit. That's one. The other is people who are legally in this country, such as international students, but who could get caught up in things because of the racial profiling that Karina was talking about. What do we need to do? I represent Spalding University, so I'm wondering as a university, what do I need to do to make sure that my international students are okay? And then I'm also wondering about the people with the pending.
So we need to do a training.
Yeah.
We need to come there and do a training, for one, for staff, for anybody, for campus grounds people, like security, right, those folks, because you need to understand the difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant. You need to train your folks to say you can't even be on campus grounds, or, there's designated areas we're going to allow you to be in that does not put your students in any danger. So that is number one. So we need to schedule that or organize it in some way. International students, so I will just say again, the last go around, the H-1B program, which is the only sort of education-based skilled worker program that we have, and students were targeted specifically. So students who had admission, for instance, who were just waiting to get their visas, that was all shut down. They were questioning and scrutinizing, are you really studying, or we'll just revoke your status, et cetera. And just as an aside, the vast majority of STEM students in this country are all foreign students. I think over 80%. So that's just an aside. But you need to do a training because, again, the importance of figuring out who's allowed where is critical. You mentioned asylum. I will say that, again, when you're talking about documentation, people that apply for asylum get a receipt notice that says that they've applied for asylum, and that's it. They're allowed to apply for work authorization 150 days. So, after the filing, the receipt date after their filing. And so they get work authorization. You can get a social security number with work authorization. With a social security number and work authorization, you can get a Kentucky driver's license. You cannot get a driver's license without any of those documents. So we tie our licensing to work authorized statuses, essentially, in the US. But if you have a pending asylum case, that receipt makes you lawfully present. And that's important. That's very important because, again, we don't know what local law enforcement is going to be trained on. The ICE officers are trained on it, but they may not pay any attention. So that's important to know. That is they should have that on them because it's the only proof of their status that it's pending.
May I add something else? We talk about safety plan. And that safety plan will go to them. Like there needs to be someone, since I came as an international student, and the only family that you have is other students or your trusted professors, to have a safety plan with them. And that will also go to, let's say, a student that came from California, that came from Chicago, and that will be perceived as undocumented. Any kind of student that can be perceived as undocumented needs to have a safety plan with people that he can say, I'm here, I'm not here, that can notice that they are not going to school or that they have disappeared.
Thank you all. So, Amos, I'm going to ask you to join us for some words, and then I have some brief summary comments, and then we'll go.
All right. Thank you, David. Can we get a hand for our panelists, please? I think they are all incredible human beings and service providers in our community, and we are very, very lucky to have them in our city. But also give yourself a hand because you're still here at almost 8 p.m. As David mentioned, my name is Amos Zerimana, and I have the honor of serving as a director for the Office for Immigrant Affairs in the Mayor's Office. And so David has asked me to give closing remarks. So I'm going to be very brief because I know most of us have been here for a while. But I do want to, again, thank our panelists who have shared a lot of information. And I will say that most of what was shared is the sort of tip of the iceberg of what the reality looks like. As Karina said, the fears of our international population here in Louisville are very, very real. And I'm going to try not to get emotional. So most of our partners who are in this room know that between 2017 and 2020, I worked for an immigration law firm. And during that time, the reality was the same, like we are about to enter in right now. And we had an ICE officer that stopped in front of our office every single day. So one day, just walking out of the office, going home, I was stopped, and I was harassed by an ICE officer. And so we're talking about all of these safe places and locations and of where you might be stopped, but it could be anywhere, right? Many of you all remember in 2020, our state legislature tried to pass legislation that would allow basically anybody who is a law enforcement official in our community to ask you of your status. And that's most likely going to be the reality here going forward. And the one thing that I noticed here is that a lot of the people who are impacted by most of these executive orders and policies, they are not in this room. And so what I realized about this conversation that we're having here is that we're not only learning about these things that have become a reality since yesterday, but also, I think, to me, it's reminding me to ask ourselves, what kind of community are we going to be in this time, right? David mentioned that we were the second city in the United States to be designated a certified welcoming city, and we are proud of that. But my question to you is, how will you be a welcomer? How will you help create a welcoming community during these next 4 years? My office will do our part, and I will do my part individually. But how will you use this information that you are learning here today to share with the communities that are directly impacted? Karina asked a question here. How many of you think they will be stopped by or asked by ICE of your citizenship status if they walked into this room? Many of us have that fear everywhere, not just in this room. Our places of work, our schools, our homes. And so that is what I'm going to send you with today. How will you support somebody who's not here, who's not hearing this information that is so vital for them to protect themselves? What will your organization do to support those individuals? And so I urge you to go home asking yourself these questions, and not just today, but every day for the next 4 years. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Amos. I was going to have some closing comments, but how can I close better than that? We will be sending out information about tonight, including some of the resources that were talked about tonight, things like examples of a judge's order, things like what a safety plan may look like, an emergency plan may look like. If we do not have your email, please register so that we can send that to you. And keep fighting, keep alert, and keep paying attention to what the executive orders are. And there will be many more of these events in the community, and I think it's important to continue to attend these events because things will change. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you all very much.